Hey Reddit, when did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? I was building a fort in the woods near my house as a kid. Got this eerie feeling that something was wrong, so I packed my stuff and made my way home. Next day, on my way to school on the bus, my friend mentioned a cougar his family saw running across the road that was within a couple hundred feet of where I was. It just so happened to be at the same time I was out there. I smelled burning plastic early in the morning at my family cottage and almost went back to sleep. I was around 15, but got up to investigate. A socket on the outside of the building had caught fire and flames were shooting up the wall. The rest of my family was still sleeping and there wasn't enough smoke for the alarms to go off. I ran and got the fire extinguisher, got my dad up, and put it in his hands and pointed him towards the fire, stopped it and called the fire department. Not me but my mom's best friend. July 2000. My mom's best friend Michelle and her husband were out of town. Michelle has this overwhelming feeling of panic and that something was wrong and my mom needed her. Neither of them had cell phones. Michelle felt so uneasy that she made her husband drive them back home. My dad had committed suicide at our home that morning. I was president of a club, and a guy who'd recently joined just set off my alarm bells. But he never did anything wrong. I still couldn't shake the feeling he was off. I asked my best friend, a pretty burly guy, to just keep an eye on him during a conference we went to. Most of the club, minus me, went to a party at the conference. My best friend kept an eye on the weird guy for most of the night and ended up stopping him from raping a passed out drunk girl. I pretty much always trust my gut feelings now. Apparently the same sort of thing happened at the club I'm a part of. They let this guy come with, but he gave everyone off vibes. Please advised all the girls in the club to not be alone, especially with him. He tried to creep on all the girls there. Now he's not allowed to come with. When my husband and I were in college, we came home late one night after a long day and had to get up early the next day. We were both so tired and he wanted to leave his backpack and computer in the car because we were going to be getting up and back into the car in a few hours. My gut feeling said absolutely not and I made him take his bag and computer. When we came back down the next morning, his car had been broken into. We were looking at houses a while back and found one that was great location, would have been perfect size for us, and didn't appear to need any work other than new carpet and stuff I wanted to do like painting and switching it over from oil burning furnace. I just had a nagging feeling about it, and my husband agreed. As much as we loved it, something was off with it. I actually thought ghost or something silly like that, and we ended up passing on it. I was still kicking myself about it until a few months later when it had a major electrical fire. The whole house and everything in it was a total loss, and the family that lived there barely got out alive. My mom dropped my 3-year-old brother off at daycare before she had to work in the morning. When she got to work, she had this terrible feeling something was wrong with him. She ended up leaving work and drove to the daycare. She found the daycare lady inside sleeping while the daycare kids, including my brother, were running around the pool. My brother never went back to that daycare again. I was driving and it started to snow. I noticed that I was going a bit fast and strongly sensed I should slow down. I did, and a couple seconds later I came up around a bend with the road suddenly being covered in ice. I started to fishtail while sliding directly towards two people standing outside their car. They had wrecked in the same manner that I was about to do and were standing outside their car, with me heading straight for them. I quickly thought of my options and ended up doing a hard right straight into the highway barrier. I slid nearly 100+ feet, dragging the front of my car to slow it down. Because I had decided to slow down, I was able to give the two guys enough time to get out of the way before I slammed into their cars. Even though I totaled my car, which was sad, I did not end up killing two people that night. The police did not end up ticketing anyone thankfully, and they finally sanded the road after we had all wrecked. LOL. Snow while driving still scares me to this day. My mother had a student die last week in a similar accident. He was helping someone who slid off the road and another car crashed into them both, killing all three. I am so glad your story had a better outcome. Not quite sure if it was a gut feeling, but kinda close. It was Christmas Eve night in my childhood house. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse, and my mom had gotten a large TV for my dad and hid it in my doorless closet along with some other presents. At one point in the night, she had come back into my room to retrieve one of the smaller items and ended up moving the TV right in front of my wall heater and didn't put it back. I didn't notice and went to sleep a little later. I don't know if it was the smell or a gut instinct, but thank God I woke up, because that night early the next morning I woke up to find my room filling with smoke and a nice orange glow coming from the back of the TV box. Luckily no large flames had formed yet and I was able to stop it simply by moving the box out of the way and of course turned off the heater and evacuated the room. The smoke wasn't super bad so the house didn't get too much and my room eventually stopped smelling of it. TLDR mom almost burned the house down on Christmas but I woke up in time to stop it. I had gone to this bar back home with a few friends and afterwards everyone was supposed to go to this house party. I was game to go from the moment I was invited. Halfway through the night I had this gut feeling to not go. I told my best friend that she shouldn't go but she insisted that she wanted to go because there were a few cute guys there. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't go, but she talked me into it. When we got in my car to head to the party the guy feeling was worse. I grew up around cars and driver manual. My best friend is completely clueless when it comes to cars, so I deliberately grinded the gears and jerked the car and made it stall, acting like something was wrong. I pretended to try to fix what wasn't broken and after about 15-20 minutes of fixing my car, cops and fire trucks followed by EMS flew by us. I fixed my car but told my best friend that I just wasn't feeling well and she agreed and said my car breaking down ruined her mood. So we went back to my place to watch movies. About an hour after getting home we got a call from a friend of ours saying that the girl who owned the house and who was throwing the party was cheating on her husband who was deployed and came back and left to surprise her and caught her in bed with his buddy. Dude pulled a gun and started shooting at this girl and his friend while everyone else fled the house. Few years back I went to uni in Brussels. I would always take the train to get there. One morning I just woke up and didn't feel great at all. Keep in mind I have had a horrible flare up of Crohn's for the last weeks, but this felt different. Guess it was my gut. So instead of pushing through it like I did with Crohn's, I decided to stay home for once. This was the only day out of 2 that I ever stayed home from uni. That day the terror attack happened on the train that I usually ride to get to uni. I had a gut feeling I should pull my wallet and phone out of my purse. Not even 20 seconds later, I get mugged. The man dragged me across the sidewalk and stole my purse but all he ended up getting was a juice box and my birth control. I was going to meet up with someone from Marketplace to buy a phone and the feeling hit me so I called the woman and a man answered trying to play off the fact he's a man and I passed by where we were meeting at and it was dark and I heard voices in the background on the phone call. I never stopped the car and kept going. Pretty sure I saved myself from at the very least a mugging but learned a good lesson. Always meet in a public place. You can meet at police stations. I believe most are okay with this. When I was young, around 8 or 9 probably, I lived 3 blocks from a convenience store. It was the early 90s. My best friend and I convinced our parents to let us walk to the store alone to get some snacks. Important to add that the 2 blocks closest to the store are connected but the 3rd block we lived on was its own unconnected neighborhood. So anyway, as we are walking back from the store, we are coming up to the 1st street and a truck drives by and stops on the side of the road and between the 1st and 2nd block on our side of the road. I stopped and told my friend that we should go down the 1st street and go through the neighborhood, come back out the 2nd street and then head to our 3rd street to avoid the truck. She thought I was being stupid but I refused to keep walking on the main street so she followed me down the 1st road. We are now in the 1st neighborhood and about halfway between the 1st and 2nd street when we see the truck slowly driving down the 2nd street into the neighborhood. The driver sees us and immediately slams on the gas and turns his truck towards us on the street. We ran and hid in some bushes further into the neighborhood for about 10 minutes. We heard the truck driving by back and forth for about the first 5 and then it was quiet so we started making our way out of the neighborhood towards the 2nd street again. Suddenly, here comes the truck again slowly, sees us and guns it towards us again. We jumped over a fence into a backyard and started pounding on the back door. By the way, this is a Tuesday, middle of the day during summer vacation. Most people are at work, but miraculously, a man and woman opened the door and let us in. The woman had just had a baby like a week before, so they were home on leave. They called the cops and my mom, and the man went outside. He said the truck drove by and the man saw him standing outside and sped out of the neighborhood. Cops and my mom showed up minutes later and we gave a description and never heard anything about it again. Our parents just drove us to the convenience store from then on. My mom still talks about it to this day and how shocked she was that I had such a strong intuition at that age. Walking my dog in a park and I saw a teen girl crying by herself behind a building. Decided to trust my gut and went up and asked her if she was okay, and she said yes, but I pushed her and she told me she was feeling suicidal. Won't dive into her reasons, but I just sat and chatted with her about my own struggles with suicidal intentions and gave her my number in case she needed a shoulder in the future. She's doing much better now it seems, and though I've moved away, we still text occasionally. It didn't save me, but saved a friend. A big group of friends and I were walking home from an event in a town we weren't used to. It was night, and hardly anyone was around. Empty streets and all that. We were walking down a sidewalk that had high fences next to it, so when you turned a corner, whatever was around it was out of sight. One of the girls fell behind distracted by her phone, I think, and I noticed, so I started drifting behind as well to become a sort of midway point between her and the group. Soon, we were nearing where we were staying, and our group rounded a corner, then started making their way into the yard where our living quarters were. I saw a car drive past us, then turned the corner down the street the girl was still on. As soon as I saw it, I suddenly got this suspicious, awful feeling, so I stopped and went back to the corner to keep an eye on the friend. The car drove past her, stopped, did a complete U-turn, and slowly started creeping up behind alongside her. She was still on her phone and wasn't noticing a thing. I stepped out from behind the corner and started walking towards her. The car sped off quickly as soon as the driver saw me. It scares me that someone could have grabbed her and none of us would have seen a thing. It would have just been one of those cliche movie moments where you turn around and realize a member of the group is missing. To compound that potential tragedy, she'd just gotten engaged a few weeks prior. I think the fact that we had worked with some safe houses in the area that discussed human trafficking probably aided in me being on high alert, and the area we were in was known for that sort of thing. She's really lucky you were so aware of your surroundings and keeping an eye out for her as well. I went to go sell an expensive smartphone I got as a gift on Craigslist in Philadelphia. I talked with a guy for a while about it and he just would not agree to meet me inside anywhere. I was young and stupid and needed money, so eventually I succumbed. I hit a supermarket nearby and told him where I was, and stayed inside for a few minutes. I then realized how stupid I was for going alone to this sale and not meeting inside in a relatively public place. As I walked out, a group of unscrupulous looking fellows asked me if I was selling a smartphone on Craigslist. I decided to just stroll on past and get in my car and leave. After they realized I had ditched the meetup, I started getting all sorts of threatening text messages and voicemails from this group of guys. I am pretty positive I would have been mugged if I hadn't walked past them because of my gut. Be safe with Craigslist. There are good and bad things that happen with the site. The guy who sold me his motorcycle said that he always meets down the street from his house just in case, and he just ditched a deal because he looked out his window and the car he was meeting with was a bee of jacked dudes in a car. Definitely would have gotten mugged that day. Stay safe, my friend. My family was out visiting relatives in California when I was about 12 years old. My brother and I were at a beach attempting to bodyboard, with my dad keeping a close eye on us from the shore. At one point, every nerve in my body just screamed dive, so I ducked under the water. When I resurfaced, there was a surfboard floating away in front of me, some guy frantically swimming after it, and my dad waving us to come to shore. Apparently the second after I dove underwater, the surfboard went over my head. Probably would have cracked my skull open if I had been there. I was hanging out with friends at a bar but then going to head to my friend's to stay the night. We drove separately though. It was in a city with a super high crime rate and in an even rougher part of town. We left the bar at like 3 AM and the drive wasn't far, but I was really low on gas and wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I'm not normally a person who's paranoid over city neighborhood crime rates, and I spent like half my time in this city and in the area we were in anyway, so it wasn't foreign to me by any means. Even so, just to be on the safe side, I picked a gas station that was well lit and at a relatively busy intersection. I was the only car at the gas station, and when I pulled up to the pump I luckily took a moment to text my friend that I'd catch up with him in a few minutes. As I'm doing that, though, another car pulls up right on the other side of the pump that I was at. I have no idea what made me pause, but I just waited a second to let them get out first. But I had to keep waiting, because they weren't getting out. At first, I thought that maybe they were taking a moment to get their wallet, text someone, just doing something. I couldn't see through the window tint at all, though, but I also tried to not stare at them or make it super obvious. I'm also not a very intimidating guy. I waited it out for 5 minutes and then started getting more worried. I texted my friend to tell him exactly where I was. I couldn't leave because I didn't have enough gas to get anywhere else, and I didn't want to just drive to my friend's place in the event that they followed me. Another 10 minutes later, the car pulled off. No one ever got out to get gas, including me. I just headed to my friend's and decided to risk getting there on what I had left in my tank. I'm not sure what made me that paranoid at that moment, but I'm really freaking glad I hesitated. TLDR, was real close to getting my car jacked at a gas station in the middle of the night, but decided to trust my gut. There's always the chance the person in the other car was just like you and wanted you to get out first so you didn't jack their car, but you did do the right thing. It's better to err on the side of caution. My boyfriend and I were visiting friends for a week in Phoenix. We girls were lounging at the pool while the guys were flexing their grilling skills. My boyfriend paused a moment, stood very still, then told me to go get dressed. We had to go right now. I wanted to fuss, but something told me not to. We drove straight through to San Antonio, right to his parents' very rural house. Before cell phones, and they didn't have a landline within a half mile. Seconds before we arrived, his little sister had jumped off of a rain barrel and landed on a metal spike that went straight up through her foot and into her leg. His dad was at work, so there was no car available there. She was bleeding like crazy and his mother had just walked out and found her. I don't know what spoke to him in Phoenix, but it would have been all bad if we had not arrived exactly when we did. Circa 1983, my boyfriend and I had an apartment together. He worked, I didn't. Every day I packed a nice lunch for him and made a good dinner. One afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary, I was laying out at the complex pool and an older guy walked over to introduce himself. He wasn't hitting on me. He had just moved into town and was new to the complex. We chatted for 3 or 4 minutes when my boyfriend showed up at the pool. Odd, but okay. Introductions, then we returned to the apartment for lunch. Once behind the door of the apartment, he said to me, "Stay away from that guy. There is something very bad about him. He feels like the bottom of the deepest ocean." If you read my other post about the long sudden journey, you kinda know that he senses things. In fact, the reason he came home during his lunch was that he had a feeling, which he had before I was even at the pool. He just sensed something bad and came home. After he returned to work, I was taking the kitchen trash out and the man approached me again. I'm former army and in pretty good shape, and he's older. No place in his swimsuit for a weapon, and I could probably take him. Plus it wasn't in a secluded place. I'm not afraid. He asked me if my boyfriend was psychic. As it turns out, this guy is psychic and in fact recently transferred to San Antonio from a sister radio station to do his show there. He told me that when two psychics meet, oftentimes they feel something like cold darkness because they are receptive of vibes instead emitting like most people. In the end, he guided my boyfriend to better understand the things he sensed and they became great friends. Hope this helps some. My dad had to go to court to settle a way overdue payment for the place he worked at. He was going to take me with him so I can be more exposed to the adult world, so to speak. However, that meant he would have to leave the office back door unlocked so the rest of the staff could clock in. He suddenly didn't feel right about it and decided to have me man the office instead. He got T-boned outside the courthouse on the passenger side of the car that day. The car was totaled and I would have gotten severely hurt if I was there. This isn't my story. It's from an old high school teacher of mine. His friends were bar hopping. They were all underage and traveling to a bar about 45 minutes away. It wasn't like this is the first time they were doing this or anything. All of a sudden, he got a really bad feeling and started panicking. His friends made fun of him and wouldn't let him out of the car, but it got so bad they had to dump him in this small town in the middle of nowhere. He used a payphone and called a cab home. The next morning he saw that his friends had been in a car accident, obviously due to drunk driving. Most of the friends died. One survived with a severe brain injury. His life was saved all because of a gut feeling. Sometimes he has survivor's guilt now. IDK if I'd call not riding with a drunk driver a guy feeling as much as maybe a moment of clarity. That really sucks he couldn't get them to stop to save themselves. One time when my little sister and I wandered off in Superstore, a strange man was standing behind us in the toy aisle and I was getting super weird vibes about him. Keep in mind I was only around 9-10 and he also looked super shady. He had a big hoodie, dark sunglasses, you name it. Just screaming serial killer. So obviously my first thought was to just move away from him because we could just look at different toys anyways. Nope. Apparently not. He just kept following us but maintaining a small distance at the same time, and eventually I whispered to my sister that a man was following and we started walking in circles around different aisles to lose him until we found our dad. I remember how he looked at us one last time before walking away. I was scared of strangers for a while after that, even though I was really outgoing as a kid. I was afraid he'd followed us home for some reason. And looking back on it now, he could have been trying to snatch us or something, but maybe he just wanted to help, but I'm pretty sure there was something wrong with him. Could have been loss prevention. The ones here wear hoodies and dark glasses half the time, but they give off a weird vibe since they're actually watching like hawks. Could be he was keeping an eye on a couple parentless kids until an associate could be flagged down or the parents found them. One option that's a little less creepy. Went to buy a TV off Craigslist for $350 with a buddy, and the seller cracked the front door enough to say we needed to go through the back entrance. Being dumbasses, we did not think anything of it at the time and went to the back door. We walked 5 steps into the house and noticed all the lights were off and it was dead silent. No TV sounds, no music, no nothing, so we noped the frick out of there and drove off. Seller never called us to ask where we went or anything. We both still believe to this day it was a robbery setup and are pretty thankful we did not end up dead or seriously hurt. Never used Craigslist again, crap was sketchy. Not me, but my dad was driving to a client's office to do some IT work for them. He left the house without his coffee mug, so thought about stopping to get coffee, but he said he just had a weird feeling and decided not to. He gets to the office and goes inside, and 2-3 minutes later there's a massive crash outside. When he comes back out into the parking lot, he sees his car and the 2 parked on either side of it, stacked up on top of each other, his upside down in the middle, like a car sandwich. Some guy was driving down the street and had a seizure and veered into the parking lot at near highway speeds. Had he stopped for coffee, he likely would have just been getting out of the car at that moment. I walked into a house party and got a really bad gut feeling. Most of my friends and I left. The people who didn't leave got mugged. It was pretty scary. Not mine, but my dad's. I was downstairs helping him with some woodworking when I was 10 or 11. He went to run a 2x4 through the table saw when he noticed I was at his elbow rather than behind him. He stopped and told me to never stand behind a board when it's going through the saw in case it gets thrown. I thought he was being overly cautious and I didn't have as good of a view from behind him, but whatever. I got behind him. He flipped on the saw and ran the board through. He only got 1/3 of the way through, though, when the blade hit a knot and flung the 2x4 hard enough to crash against the wall 10 feet behind. If I hadn't moved, it would have hit me square in the chest and could have killed me. My mother's moment technically. She called me late one night apropos of nothing after we hadn't spoken in about a month. We chatted for a few minutes before I told her I'd just taken a fuckload of pills with the intent to kill myself just before she called. She phoned an ambulance and, you know, I'm still here. I'm glad she called and I hope life is better for you now. Not mine, but my aunt's. She was with my mom and some of their friends at Lake Sammamish the day Ted Bundy took Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. She was hammered, and Ted approached her after, I'm guessing, overhearing them say someone needed to do a beer run. He approached her saying he and some friends had a keg and she should come. She threw her arm around his shoulder and they walked off. My mom and their friends called after her, and she initially didn't listen. She was a stunning blonde and a flirt. It was just beer. She'd be fine. One of the other girls they were with walked up and said one of the guys went and they were going to swim until he came back. My aunt said the girl looked terrified, and suddenly my aunt felt like she was going to puke. He dropped her arm and skittered off more or less. Later the girl told my aunt she had a bad feeling about the guy, and my aunt mentioned how she also felt nauseous but thought it was because she was so drunk. Had she not been stopped, my aunt would have been Denise Nasland. Ted had already taken Janice at the time he approached my aunt. She won't talk about this day. I think she feels survivor's guilt. When people talk about how no one knew Ted Bundy was a creep, it's such a weird thing to say because of course women noticed he was creepy. Many women were just too polite to turn him down when he tried to lure them, and he preyed on their politeness. I'm glad your aunt's gut feelings kicked in and she followed them. I was on a road trip with my dad through mountainous terrain and it started raining. We were stuck in our car because of a traffic jam on a very narrow mountain road. I got a feeling that we should not be here and I told my dad that we should get out of the car just in case. My dad gave me a puzzled look but agreed after I insisted. It probably was only a minute that passed after we took shelter in a nearby tea stall that a thunderous sound startled the bejesus out of us. Lo and behold, our car was nowhere to be found. In its place was a boulder the size of a house. From that moment onwards, Final Destination has been my least favorite movie. Guy was trying to hit on me at a bar and while I was a bit drunk I was still able to think straight. I talked to him because he was kinda cute. After a while he tries to convince me to go home with him but my gut told me not to. Later on the news it said some guy was kidnapping and raping girls before killing them. Description matched the guy exactly. Never before have I felt so relieved in my life. When I was 7, my music teacher whipped out his penis at me and asked me touch it, taste it. At that age I didn't know the first thing about genitals so I didn't know what was going on, but something felt so wrong about it. I firmly refused, and he left at that, trying to cover it up by being sweet to me. The memory resurfaced around 4 years ago and I finally realized what almost happened to me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.